So hopefully everybody enjoyed the movie last week. Actually, the outline I'm going to do today was supposed to be last week's, and then the video was supposed to be this week. But because I was kind of under the weather, I kind of reversed it. So, looking around, isn't this great stuff up here? It's funny, I was standing here, I'm looking at the bear, and I was thinking, when Alice and I, 3.5 years ago, moved to Idaho, I went on the internet and I looked for hiking trails and anything I could learn. And so I came to this one interesting website, and they gave a whole list of local trails to follow and talked about wildlife. And one of the things it said, caution, depending on where you're at in the wilderness, you may run into bears. In Idaho, as most of you know, they have both brown bear and grizzly bears. So this article went on and it said, you should learn how to distinguish between the two bears. And I said, okay, because we sometimes want to go way out. So it said, one of the things you want to do is, as you're hiking, just to ward off any bear attacks, you should wear bells and carry pepper spray. And so I thought, okay, that sounds good. The other thing it said is you should also be able to distinguish black bears from grizzly bears by their droppings. And it went on to say that with brown bears or black bears, you can tell the droppings by berries, nuts, seeds, and so forth in that. And grizzly bear droppings have bells and smell like pepper spray. So, I just happened to think about that when I was up here next to the bear. So we're doing a brief history of Mormonism, and as you can tell from the film last week, there's some controversy with the history of Mormonism. And the film, how many of you enjoyed the video? Yeah, I've shown it pretty much every class I've taught for, I don't know, the last 15 years on Mormonism. So, the LDS and the Book of Mormon claim that the Book of Mormon actually teaches a historical view of masses of Hebrews migrating to the Americas, which would be the Mesoamericas, back then, leaving behind Israel and so forth. But this assertion has been challenged by a number of people, including some, as you saw in the video last week, including some LDS archaeologists and paleontologists. So, bottom line, there's no evidence for what the Book of Mormon claims. Not only is there a lack of historical evidence, but there's no evidence, none. They can't find any of those claims that are presented within the Book of Mormon. So, the Book of Mormon, as you saw last week, claimed that there were mass wars resulting in hundreds and hundreds upon thousands of casualties. They claimed that the Nephites had an ore industry, they had agriculture, and then the problem with the metals was they're saying there were metal swords, there were breastplates, there were gold and silver coins, and there were actually even machines, but no evidence of that. They also were wrong on the point of view as far as the types of flora and fauna that was mentioned in the Book of Mormon. Nothing mentioned there was actually native to Mesoamerica when the so-called Israelites came. And what I wanted to go over is, according to the Book of Mormon, Lehi, who's supposed to be Israeli prophet, he left with masses in around 600, give or take about 600 BC. Well, the problem with that is Judah was seized around 605 to 586 BC. So that's about the same time that the Book of Mormon claims that the Israelites left the Holy Lands and came to this continent. So if anybody ever brings that up, Mormon, tell them to open their Bible and have them read Jeremiah 27, verses 6 to 10. You don't have to go there, but I'll go ahead and read this. It says, "I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and I have given him also the beasts of the field to serve him. All the nations shall," what does shall mean? It means no wiggle room, right? "Shall serve him and his son and his grandson until the time of his own land comes. Then many nations and great kings shall make him their slave." And here it comes. "But if any nation or kingdom will not serve this Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and put his neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, I will punish that nation with the sword, with famine, with pestilence, declares the Lord, until I have consumed it by my hand." So here's what the Lord says also. "Do not listen to your prophets, your diviners, your dreamers, your fortune tellers, or your sorcerers who are saying to you, 'You shall not serve the king of Babylon.'" Why? Verse 10 says, "For it is a lie that they are prophesying to you, with the result that you will be removed from your land, and I will drive you out, and you will perish." So, question. If, according to the Book of Mormon, Lehi left during this era when God commanded the Israelites and Judah to submit to the yoke of Nebuchadnezzar, if they left anyway, wouldn't Lehi be considered a false prophet by disobeying God's will in Jeremiah? So right there, starting with the history, going all the way back to that era, you find something that just doesn't fit. And that's at the beginning. That's starting right off when they left, even before they had the right in this continent and had all the so-called holy wars. So this is a great tool to have in your belt. So you don't have to memorize it, but just know where to find it. So again, it's Jeremiah 27, verses 6 to 10. So if you remember, there was a battle between the Nephites and the Lamanites, but an LDS archaeologist said the Bible and the Book of Mormon both claim to represent history. I would agree with that, right? That's the claim. But what's the difference? The difference is the authenticity of the Bible is actually proven by physical evidence. As a matter of fact, archaeologists to date have discovered over 25,000 artifacts proving different things in the Bible. Over 25,000. So the same cannot be said with the Book of Mormon, because, you know, like I mentioned also in the video, not there. I mean, you can imagine these LDS archaeologists and scientists trying to find some proof. Give me some proof that Lamanites left. Give me some proof that there were these battles. Because if there were battles, there would be remnants. There would be weapons, there would be swords, there would be helmets, depending on what it is. Nothing. And they've even done extensive studies at the hill of Qumran which Joseph Smith claimed is where it took place in Palmyra, New York, you would expect to find something, right? All they have found is some Indian heads here and there. Would that be unusual? That would I'd be surprised if they didn't find Indian heads in that area. That's pretty much what they found. So why do LDS archaeologists have a negative view of the Book of Mormon? I mean, it's what they were raised with, right? So Dr. Raymond Matheny, who is a working archaeologist in Mesoamerica for some 24 years, said the scientific evidence of peoples and events chronicled in the Book of Mormon for Central America or anywhere else in the Western Hemisphere, it's not there. He said the Book of Mormon is filled with things that are out of place both historically and culturally. It introduces old world culture with pre-Columbia Americas, and even though the archaeological evidence shows no such levels during this period, they still make this claim. So defenders of the historicity of the Book of Mormon have bits of pieces that they have to put together without scientific standards. So what they're going to do, in other words, is they've already come to their conclusion, right? Now they're going to find some non-scientific evidence to help them reach that conclusion. So there's also more historically inaccurate claims for the Book of Mormon, and I mentioned the iron industry with breastplates and gold and silver coins and machinery and so forth. Again, there's no evidence. I mean, it sounds like a broken record, but I'm really wanting to stress this. There's no evidence. It's just like, and if we have time, we'll go through the evolutionary aspects of the Mormon Church. We'll do that. But even though evidence is against the Mormon Church and the Book of Mormon, they still continue to push the same narrative. So this paleontologist said that the iron industry isn't some simple feat involving a few people. It has to be a major endeavor by a culture with overwhelming archaeological evidence left behind. And again, no. Matheny also reports that no evidence was found in archaeology, but also, as I mentioned before, agricultural products. It says the Nephites produced barley and wheat and flax, and grapes, olives, and so forth in the pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. And the same thing, with the type of agriculture they're talking about, it would be not a small endeavor, but it would be a major endeavor. Like, look around here, it's getting less and less, but the fields that we find of some of these farmers who are still able to produce wheat, corn, barley, and so forth. If this country was destroyed, and archaeologists did some research 100 years from now, 200 years from now, they would find remnants on different stratospheres of the earth for what's been growing here. But there wasn't any. It's a specialized production of various foods which were supposedly consumed by the peoples who came to America. And the other thing is old world domesticated animals. These domesticated animals include cows and pigs, sheep, oxen, horses. By the way, anybody remember in the video, when were horses introduced to this continent? When? Yeah, late 1400s by the Spaniards. So during the era of what the Book of Mormon's talking about, there were no horses, and there certainly were no elephants. But the Book of Mormon claims that there were elephants. So you don't just have an elephant for a pet or a cow for a pet. That's not what the Book of Mormon is talking about. They're talking about a widespread endeavor of domesticating animals and producing crops and having machinery to mill metal. It sounds pretty nice when you read the Book of Mormon if you're not familiar with this stuff, right? And by the way, all of you in here know more about this stuff than most Mormons. I mean, seriously. They don't know this stuff, they don't teach it. And by the way, you've heard about you have the temple over here in Eagle. Only about 40% of Mormons actually are admitted into the inner spaces of the temple. The majority of Mormons never get to experience all the stuff that goes on behind those doors. And maybe next week, I'll break down the endowment ceremonies of what actually takes place in that. So, like I said, you're only more equipped, and by the time this class is over, you stick it out until the end of next month, you will know far, far more. And by the way, I think I mentioned that I did my PhD dissertation on unchristian Christianity, the incoherency of Mormon theism. I tried to keep it short for dissertations, about 106, 110 pages. Here's the thing, if you want it, I'm not going to print it out, but if you want it, send me an email, and it's yours. So all my efforts of 2 years of doing the research on this stuff, you can have it. I was going to publish it, but I just want to get it out. I've had a few people ask me about it. So just go ahead and send me an email. Like I said, my email address is in the directory, and you're more than welcome. And what it does is, the way I've done it is I've actually broken down Christian theology versus Mormon theology. So even if somebody was not interested in Mormonism, you could still actually get a lesson in essential Christian doctrine from the paper. It just happens that I juxtapose, this is what we believe as Christians, this is what the Mormons believe. So like I said, I just want to get it out there. And with this area, like I said, I think most of us know somebody who's Mormon. And what if one of us planted just one seed? That's all it would take. And maybe that person would contact one of their Mormon friends and explain this to them. But I usually get into this when I do witnessing to Mormons, and I'll do it also. But keep this in mind, please. You can evangelize to a Mormon. The Holy Spirit can touch their heart and convict them, and that Mormon can give their life to Christ. But know this, once they do that, they're ostracized. They're excommunicated. They have no friends. They have no family. So our evangelism does not stop there. We still have to come alongside them. We have to lift them up. We have to pray for them, and we have to be there for them, because they are going to go through a lot of heartache. So I don't say that to scare you, but I say that to encourage you. Okay? I mean, most of the Mormons I met with, just a few exceptions, are wonderful people. And we actually share a lot of common values. How many of you here are rejoicing over the Roe v. Wade decision? What do you think the Mormon is feeling? Same. And right now, if you need an opener, something that you both have in common, that's a great topic at the moment, right? That will open the door. So always find something that you both have in common and then go from there, all right? So Matheny's overall assessment of archaeology is no support. He says, I would say in evaluating the Book of Mormon that it has no place in the New World whatsoever. And he's not alone. Mesoamerican archaeologist Michael Coe wrote, the bare facts of the matter are that nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever shown up in any world excavation which would suggest to a dispassionate observer that the Book of Mormon, as claimed by Joseph Smith, is a history of early immigrants to our hemisphere. Now, archaeology can neither prove nor disprove a religious claim, but you can certainly compare evidence for the Book of Mormon versus evidence from the Bible. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch a few things around. Did anybody take my intro to apologetics? You did, okay. So what I'm thinking about is actually maybe next week, as we're going through the Book of Mormon here, go through reliability of Scripture. And then once you know that, then compare that with the Book of Mormon, and you're light years ahead of most Mormons. So pretty much you can see from the film and some of the stuff that I brought up, and this is just touching the surface, by the way, but even though they claim that evidence is there, there's just no evidence whatsoever. And that's why some of these LDS scientists and archaeologists are so frustrated. I mean, how would you feel if all of a sudden you found out that these 25,000 plus artifacts that have been found to support the Bible were all false? I mean, I'm not worried about it because those artifacts have been around for years. So keep this in mind also. When you share the truth with Mormons, it's going to be such a shock to them. And there may be some real sadness that their church lied to them for so many years. And when I was saying you have to come alongside them, sadly, statistics show that when a person leaves the Mormon church, most of them do not seek other churches. Most of them become atheists or agnostics. We have the evidence. It's on our side. So just keep that in mind. I want to talk a little bit about, because this falls into the history of Mormonism, but I want to talk about baptism for the dead. How many of you are familiar with baptism for the dead with Mormons? Most of you are. So Joseph Smith got a revelation on August 15th, 1840, when he was performing a funeral service, and he saw a mother there who was distraught from leaving her son. So he got a revelation. From now on, you can baptize somebody when they're dead by proxy. And the interesting thing is that they took this practice of baptizing for the dead from one verse in the Bible. Anybody know what it is? It's in 1 Corinthians, and it's 15:29. And it says this, otherwise, what will those do who are baptized for the dead? If the dead are not raised at all, why then are they baptized for them? That's the verse. 1 Corinthians 15:29. They took that and made an entire doctrine on baptizing for the dead. And the interesting thing is former Apostle James Talmage said this: "These words are unambiguous in the fact that they are presented without explanation or comment, argues the principle of baptism for the dead was understood among the people to whom the letter was addressed." Well, a couple problems with his assertion is, okay, number one, he didn't read Hebrews 9:27, which I know all of you know this. It says, "And inasmuch as it is appointed for man to die once, and after that, what? Comes judgment." So and here's the thing, it's extremely important to understand that throughout the entire book of 1 Corinthians, as the author, Paul uses first-person pronouns. I, we, you, personal pronoun, right? Until he gets to verse 29. And then what does he do? He says, they. See, that's really important because throughout the entire book of 1 Corinthians, he's using first-person pronouns, but then when he gets to that verse 29, rather than using an inclusive pronoun, he uses a third person saying they out there. So he's disassociating himself with anything to do with baptism for the dead. He's not endorsing it. He's not suggesting it. He's just making an observation. So it's like in Acts 17:23. We just see Paul nor any of the other apostles never mentioned baptism for the dead. It's not mentioned in any other book in the Bible. It's mentioned in that one single verse. Now notice when we read in Acts, I think it's Acts 17, where Paul comes upon the tomb of the unknown God, right? He didn't worship that unknown God. Why did he bring it up? For observation, just telling what he happened to see. And then also, Luke 16, we all know this, the rich man and Lazarus, right? What was the rich man doing? He was pleading. He was pleading, go tell my brethren. Why? Because even though he was rich on this earth, when he passed away and he was sent to Hades, he realized there was no escaping. There was no second chance. So Luke 16 is another really important, Luke 16, 19 to 31 if you want that. So also in the Book of Mormon, in Alma 34, 32, and 33, it says something interesting about salvation. And it says, "For behold, this life is a time for men to prepare to meet God. Yea, behold, the day of this life is one day for men to perform their labors. And now, as I said unto you before, as ye have said so many times with witnesses, therefore, I beseech of you that you do not procrastinate the day of your acceptance until the end. For after this day of life, which is given us to prepare for eternity, behold, if we do not improve our time while in this life, then cometh the darkness wherein there can be no labor performed." Oops. Remember, I think the first week I told you, you're going to be really confused as we go through studying Mormonism. It's because of stuff like this. Over here, they say this, and then over here, they say something contradictory. Are there any contradictions in the Bible? Zero. Are there any apparent contradictions? Well, there's apparent contradictions, but an apparent contradiction is not a contradiction. It's something that on the surface looks like it could be, but there is an explanation for it. Does that make sense? Yeah, so there are absolutely no contradictions in the Bible. There's just, first one that comes to mind is in one verse we read where Judas went out and killed himself, right? And then in Acts, he went out and what? He hung himself. It's an explanation, because supposedly he took his life, but then they found that his bowels were actually burst open. But then it says in Acts that he was hung. So, sounds like a contradiction, but let me ask you this, and it's a little bit off track, but I think it's important. Is it possible that while hanging, the branch could have snapped and he could have fallen below on the rocks? Now keep in mind, when was Judas hung? During Passover, right? During Holy Passover, would a Jew ever touch a dead body? Never. So that body's going to hang there. And being a retired deputy and now being a first responder chaplain, I've dealt a lot, sadly, with bodies and so forth. So it's very logical that what could have happened is just what the Bible teaches, and which coincides between the two explanations. That he could have been hung, the rope could have broken, branch could have broken, fallen to the rocks, and his intestines burst. So, and this isn't just Mormons that may bring this up. This is some non-believer. So this is something to put in your pocket to remember that, okay, this is an apparent contradiction, and I've had people bring this up before, and that's why I mentioned it to you, so that you have an idea. It's like, oh, yeah, but what about this? So anyway, enough about that. So it's interesting, they're baptizing for the dead, but yet in the book of Alma, it says, do not procrastinate. This is it. I mentioned a little bit about the priesthood first week, okay? And if you remember, in 1829, May of 1829, Joseph Smith and all our cadre were out in the woods praying, and what happened? First time they were visited by John the Baptist, right? And John the Baptist bestowed upon them the Aaronic priesthood. And then just a short time later, still within that same month, they were visited by John, James, right? And they were given the Melchizedek priesthood. Now, Joseph Smith said, man cannot act legally in the same name of the Lord unless he is vested in the priesthood, which is divine authority. No man has the power or the right to take this honor to himself unless he is called of God, as was Aaron. He has no authority to officiate in any of the ordinances of the gospel. Should he do so, his act is not valid or recognized in the heavens. Pretty clear, according to what he's saying, but Joseph Smith didn't read Hebrews. In Hebrews, in chapter 4, the author says, seeing then that we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weakness, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. And then the author goes on in chapter 7 and says, but he, because he continues forever, so keep these adjectives in mind. Continues when? forever, is unchangeable, and therefore is also able to save to the uttermost those who come to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for such a high priest was fitting to us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and becomes higher than the heavens. So the author of Hebrews says, in addition to the high priest being holy, harmless, undefiled, ask a Mormon, if they possess those characteristics. And I'm going to guarantee you they'll say no, they don't. Okay. And here's a problem with, I wanted to at least get to this point today, but here's a problem with the priesthood of Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith claimed to be from the tribe of Ephraim. Remember in the Bible, Ephraim and Manasseh? Who were Ephraim and Manasseh? Yeah. They were Joseph's sons, right? But who is their mother? Her mother was a Menide. What's significant about that? She was Egyptian. Why is that important? Because the Book of Mormon claims that anybody who's Egyptian is cursed. So if that's true, and if Joseph Smith claims to come from the tribe of Ephraim, he's disqualified from holding the priesthood. Oops. So, in Genesis 48, okay, let me just finish here. 48, it says, now the two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, I come before you into Egypt, are mine as Reuben and Simon, and they shall be mine. So, just a mere fact, based on what Joseph Smith says, he never had the right to hold the priesthood, but yet it was so important. So, we're out of time. Any questions real quick?